Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Youth in the Field session. My name is Mitchell Dumpson. I am the youth specialist with the California Coalition for Youth, as well as the Ride or Die team member for the Grand Challenge, and as well as the youth leadership body member, or one of them, for A Way Home America. And when we're talking about mental health and youth in particular, we're trying to change the way we look at mental health. Instead of looking at it from a way of like this whole parentalism, where there's youth that need something and there's these people that provide something that the youth need, I'm thinking of more moving towards self-advocacy for the youth and teaching youth how to get the things that they need for themselves and how to solve problems for themselves. And I'm going to pass it on to one of our colleagues.
Hi, my name is Kylene Hashimoto, and I am a board member of the Fresno County Behavioral Health Board, a committee member of the, wait for this, Youth Innovation Project Planning Committee of the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission for the state of California, and also an advisory committee member of the Innovation Incubator Project for MHS OAC, as well as the founder for the Wildfire Effect, which is a nonprofit that helps youth and their parents navigate the mental health system.
Eboni, sorry to interrupt, but you're muted. If you'd start over, that would be fantastic. Apologies.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I have a Bluetooth mic and I clicked it on that, so I thought I clicked it on my phone. Hi, new introduction. My name is Eboni Stallworth, and I'm a board member for California Youth Empowerment Network, also known as CYAN. I'm also a new residential advisor for Career Systems Development, which has a contract with Sacramento Job Corps. And I'm also the founder of Quarterly, which explores the relationship between mental health, disability, and spirituality. My goal is essentially making a way for youth who practice different spiritualities or come from marginalized communities to form their own voice and their own sense of agency.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Levi Deatherage. I'm from San Bernardino, California. I am the current program manager and youth advisory board chair for the Family Assistance Program, which is located in San Bernardino. I'm also the chair of my county's Homeless Youth Task Force. I am also on the board of directors and the youth advisory board chair for the California Coalition for Youth. And a majority of my focus is built around positive youth leadership and development. So teaching young people from impoverished or marginalized backgrounds and allowing them to have a platform to better advocate for the issues that they deem important in their own communities. I'm excited to see what we have today. So thank you all for your time.
And with that, folks, I am back. Excited to kick off this panel discussion with these amazing young people. You already got the bio. You already know they energized, activated, and ready to let you guys hear, listen, understand, and have that confidence to support them and their peers. So I'm going to start off with the first question, which is, there are transition age youth who have a rightful distrust for the system of care, whether that be mental health, physical health, amongst others. How do we establish trust and create a healthy working relationship with transition age youth, also Tay? And I will start that off with Mitchell.
Well, first of all, when we're talking about youth going into the system, we're already dealing with people that have gone through a lot of trauma. So the first thing is trauma-informed care. And there's three pillars for trauma-informed care. One being safety, making sure that whenever someone is dealing with a youth in crisis, that they're keeping them safe. Number two is their connection, making sure that you're accurately keeping the relationship with those youth that are having these crises. And the third part is managing emotional impulses, where part of the, I guess, treatment of anything related to mental health is emotional impulses, which are the things that cause discourse in our lives. And I'm going to pass it to Kylene.
Yeah, I really like that you used the term or the phrase rightful distrust. When I was released from my third stay in an inpatient facility, I was really angry, and that's why I actually got into advocacy work. But my recommendation is to approach those agencies and youth groups in the community that already have youth trust. It's easier to go through those channels that are already working with their youth, and the youth really are willing to open up with what their thoughts and challenges have been with the system. And right now, I think that we tend to work as silos, but if we work together, then that's how we really make collaborative change.
Ebony, can you unmute yourself, sweetie? Thank you.
I did it again. Okay.
It's okay.
Essentially what I was saying was, just to start off, like as a Black queer trans youth, I'm 25, with grandparents from the South. I've definitely have seen, everything from eugenics to like medical racism that I've experienced myself. And so I think one thing that we can start off with is one, not assuming that youth story, developing a relationship with programs that do have a trusting relationship with youth, but at the same time, exploring the language of the youth and allowing the youth to guide how they communicate. For example, my pronouns, I didn't get to say them, but my pronouns are they, them. And I think it's healthy to provide educational trainings to staff that allow them to learn the histories of the communities that they're interacting with, as to not offend or, become discriminatory. Some medical schools still struggle with students who hold on to eugenic beliefs about like how Black patients take pain. So I think it starts there as well, with professionals in the schools that they attend debunking myths about various communities.
Thank you very much to all my fellow panelists. That's a lot of, there were a lot of really articulate thoughts put out there. I think for me, when we're talking about establishing trust with our TAY populations, we have to begin from a point of understanding that these young people have been taught to survive, and they have been essentially forced to thrive without very many positive relationships in their lives for some of them. And when we're talking about how do we establish that trust, for me, it always comes down to the principle of relationships first and then services second. So a part of my job with my agency is I run a youth drop-in center in San Bernardino. And for young people from this community, they are oftentimes kind of born into generational poverty. And a lot of them are taught to believe that is what their life is meant to be. So for me, when I get these young people in drop-in center, or when I meet them out on the streets doing street outreach, I always start from a premise of, let me establish a relationship with this young person first. And then oftentimes, once you establish a trusting relationship with the young person, they'll tell you what it is they want. They'll tell you what it is they need to move on to that next step of growth. So I think oftentimes as providers, and I'm 23, so I wear both the youth and the provider hat. I think that we believe that it's our job to save these young people, which is great in principle. But in all honesty, it's our job to offer these young people supports and offer them guidance so that they can save themselves. Because I think for my agency, and I would imagine for most of your agencies as well, we're a hand up, not a handout agency. So we believe that it's our job to simply provide these young people with the tools to make the decisions on how they want their life to turn out, because what I deem as successful might not be successful for one of my other peers. So it's really about not asking a fish to climb a tree, because we try to put these young people in programs right off the bat without even knowing beforehand what their interests or what their strengths are. So that principle of strength-based relationship building, identifying where these young people need support, and then allowing them to identify where they need support as far as how to take that next step forward. That's where I believe we have the most success. And I'll say it again, but relationships first, services second.
So, as you heard, folks in attendance, relationships are pivotal, and the services must accommodate them on their journey. And so, my next question to the young folks is, how do we ensure youth have input and contribute to decision-making processes as it pertains to programs for youth or that should be for youth? Mitchell?
I think that it's very important to meet youth where they are at, whatever it may be. You know, people have such different situations, whether a lot of my work includes youth experiencing homelessness. So it's like when you have someone who has nowhere to go, has nowhere to sleep, you know, or no stable place to go, stable place to sleep. It's the best option is to meet them where they are and to bring them the things that they need, you know, if it may be like a cell phone, or if it could be, you know, just being there, making sure that you can connect them in a way that is best for their situation.
So I really want to emphasize the point that there's a difference between representation and participation. I think youth tend to be tokenized, like, oh, check that box, we have a youth present. But something that we do with the Youth Innovation Committee is hold youth innovation labs. And so that gives a platform for youth to contribute their voices and voice their concerns of specific issues within their own counties. And youth adult allies will contribute their side of it, whether they be from departments or community change leaders, to really bring their ideas to fruition on the logistical side. So we really have to understand that we have to work together. I mean, anyone can point out the issues, but creating those viable solutions takes everybody's perspective.
Just as what was previously stated, youth often do get tokenized. And it brought up a thought that I had earlier about how we often systematically represent youth, but are not inclusive or create an equitable relationship with youth. We need to create a systemic a relationship that systematically supports and affirms youth. And by that, I mean organizations often have bylaws. They often have a way in which they have to go about things, and just starting from the ground up, ensuring that those bylaws, one, not only include youth, but create a space in which youth actually hold power in those organizations, and also ensuring that the youth that they're picking are coming from a diverse group. Because sometimes when we do bring in youth, we might bring in youth who, you know, there's nothing wrong with having a college education, but some of the youth that I serve and even in my family have been impacted by the juvenile detention center. Some youth are undocumented, and there's various, experiences that youth might have that might bar them from being able to even find a program or being able to access one without organizations that purposely go to find those youth and provide those youth with opportunities to hold power in organizations that impact policies that impact their daily life. So I would say definitely going from there.
Thank you very much. And the issue of tokenization is one that comes up often for me. And I think it comes up often for any young people who find themselves in positions of influence in traditionally adult dominated circles. So I think the best way to prevent tokenization is to give your young people real responsibilities. So what makes me feel as though I'm not being tokenized by my agency when I speak on their behalf, whether it be for CCY or for Family Assistance Program, is because these agencies make a real effort to give me tasks that I know are important to those agencies, and then they trust me to complete them. So giving your young people power doesn't necessarily just mean giving them a spot on a board. To me, it means giving them a spot on a board that's a working position, a position that requires them to accomplish goals, to set deadlines and meet them, to have a real professional experience while a part of these groups that they're on. And also, I think we can't talk about tokenization if we don't talk about compensation for our young people. There's a lot of young people who do speaking events all the time, and they speak on behalf, they share their own personal stories, which, as we all know, can be traumatizing or triggering. And a lot of times they aren't compensated as such. So one thing that we've had a lot of success with in San Bernardino County is we compensate all of our young people for participation in our youth advisory board. And we also give them stipends for any time they go out and speak on behalf of our agency. We make sure they're paid for that. And I think that that's a crucial element of this conversation, because in my opinion, if you are asking someone to do work for free, you don't respect their ability to do that work well. So I break it down as a program manager. I don't ask my volunteers to do as much as I ask my paid staff to do, because my paid staff are receiving compensation for that work, whereas volunteers are there out of the kindness of their heart. So I can't expect them to do as much as somebody I'm paying. And I think we really have to have an honest conversation about what youth compensation looks like, because if we are going to ask our young people to participate and we are all getting paid to do these things, why should our young people not also be paid? And if you want to talk about how to get young people actively involved and how to make sure their voices are heard, help them establish a goal. I believe that if any of you have a youth advisory board or a youth action group in your agency or your community, if you were to ask the people in that group, I guarantee you there's 10 ideas of ways they know they could improve their community and improve the lives of other young people. And it's about taking the time to have those conversations. And I believe as providers, we should be there to simply help facilitate those conversations, and we should allow our young people to determine what their goals are.
Speechless. Lot of information that has come, a lot of really insightful. This is coming from the youth. And so when we think about this, we need to make sure that we affirm the youth. So my next question is, what tools and methods can we use to affirm youth we serve? And again, I will start with you, Mitchell.
Well, as Ebony pointed out, their pronouns are they, them pronouns. And I think that affirming the youth's identity, however they may choose to represent their identity, is very important. Also, with Levi talking about compensation for youth and participation, that is one way to affirm that what the youth are doing is important, because what's more important for your time than helping other people, and what's a good measure of your time for helping other people, is the amount of money that you get. Or not the amount of money, but the fact that you're actually getting paid for your time is a good way to affirm our youth. Another thing is to actually listen to the youth when they're talking. Like if they tell you, for instance, with one of my bosses, I was explaining a mental loop that I was in on a train, like not wanting to get off one stop and go on to the next stop or whatever. And my boss listened to me and said, wow, it's great that you saw yourself in that loop and you got yourself out, because that was something that was really pertinent to me in my mind at that point. And the way that he really made sure that I was okay, that are, which is this is all about, is having youth realize that they're full of potential and they're full of light and they're full of love and they can do whatever they want.
never know if my computer freezes because of me or if it's on the other end. But just to piggyback off of what Mitchell said, is that I think the best way to really show that you are listening and taking consideration of the things I was providing is to implement those programs and show those innovations within the different systems. So another part is that you shouldn't have them just be a part of the decision making, but the ongoing adaptations or ideas to improve the programs. We tend to, I guess, just have them part of that tokenism piece again. And having a survey of like, rate this program from 1 to 5, I'm not sure that really tells you much of what my experience was like. So make sure that you're asking those right questions. I think that people tend to invest their time in things that their hearts are really invested in. So just give them those opportunities and those platforms to have their voice be heard, and they'll definitely accept that opportunity.
I think one thing we can do, like I was mentioning earlier, with supporting and affirming youth is, as was mentioned earlier, like asking them what their pronouns are, what their name is. I mean, I know that might sound a bit like, why would I ask them what their name is? But there's plenty of youth who use different names for different reasons, whether it's cultural, or whether it's because their name is attached to something that they don't align with anymore, whether it's due to them transitioning, or if it's due to, you know, maybe they lived in an unstable house, or had an unstable childhood, and maybe they don't really align with that name because it's attached to something traumatic. So, you know, just to start off, like even upon your first meeting with the youth, that's one thing. But another way to affirm youth is, you know, including youth in the creation of youth programs. Like even before you implement it and have them come in and rate, you know, the program. My background is in humanities and religious studies, and also in business. And even as I was developing my business, I had to survey before I even, you know, launched it, and have participants be a part of a beta group. And so I think that's one thing that programs can implement to ensure that they're affirming youth. Another way to affirm youth as well is when there are problems that arise, supporting youth in resolving those issues, right? So that could include, you know, I've had experiences being one of the few Black students in a class. And one thing I would have appreciated is when I was dealing with, you know, acts of anti-Blackness, that I was included in the resolvement of that problem. And I was able to lead the resolvement of that problem. I think oftentimes paternalism occurs in programs, and that ends up making the youth feel like they don't really have a say. They're kind of just there to kind of, you know, input here and there. But my whole point is, you know, allowing youth to establish these programs from the ground up, allowing youth to take on, as was mentioned earlier by Levi, be compensated, as well as allowing them to take on tasks that show that, hey, like you're actually part of the foundation and the structure of this program. Also allowing youth to take on acts of leadership with other youth, and trading information and like cultural sharing, I think also would help, especially in regards to mental health, because there are, you know, communities for one reason or another that if they don't have distrust, they might look at mental health in a very particular way, especially if they have certain spiritual practices. They might view, for example, a manic episode as a spiritual gateway. And I'm not saying that, you know, people should allow people in a manic episode to not be treated. But I think it's very important to get an understanding of how that youth might relate to their mental condition, whether they use person first language or whether they use disability or neurodiverse first language, I think is also important. Another way we can affirm youth as well is allowing them, like, for example, the rate 1 to 5. I think I was I definitely resonate with that. I think one thing that we can do to affirm the youth is when we give those surveys, like unless you literally need to be in the room, like leave the room and allow them to like truly discuss with a trusted person, like how they feel. Cause I think you would really get like the most honest surveys ever. And you'd probably get a lot of gems that you can use to add into your program.
Yeah, thank you all. And I want to say that for me, the concept of needing to affirm our young people is something I take very seriously. And I think that I don't want to speak for my other panelists here, but I would imagine that you all have at some point felt like I do oftentimes, where I walk into a board meeting, or I guess nowadays I log into a board meeting, and it's me in a room with 30 or 40 middle-aged people telling me about how to best solve the issues pertaining to youth experiencing homelessness. And that can be very difficult for a young person to walk into a room where you sit at a table and everyone at the table, you go around, you list your titles, and you're surrounded by CEOs and executive directors and COOs and and program managers, and you are simply just a youth with lived experience. And even just that concept of the titles is a form of adultism, because when people go around and list these titles off, it's almost a way of like, hey, I know what I'm talking about because I have these titles next to my name on my business card, which by no means am I saying you don't know what you're talking about, but that can be very disheartening for a young person who's new to these spaces to feel confident and feel comfortable to share their thoughts in an authentic way in those settings. And the main thing I want to focus on is we have to do a better job of advocating for our young people to advocate for themselves. We really need to do a better job as a society and as a culture on teaching our young people to speak with confidence and to speak with power. Because at the end of the day, I've been at a lot of meetings, I've been at a lot of seminars, a lot of rallies where people get up and talk on a microphone. And the most heartbreaking thing for me is when I see a young person who's excited to get up and talk at a microphone and they haven't been prepared for how to handle that kind of pressure. And they start to cry, or they start to stutter, or you can see they're really struggling. And that can be very difficult for a young person to come back from. I personally know of people who they get up to try to speak and it doesn't go well, they will never get up and speak again. So I think that it's our responsibility to nurture our young people and to prepare them so that when they go into these spaces, they are confident to speak with conviction, so that they don't have to try to fit their dialogue to any narrative that's out there. They can speak simply and solely from their experience and what they know to be true, which is, in my opinion, the most valuable of information. Because what better way to know how to address the needs of our young people? What better way to know how we can affirm our young people than if we simply go and ask these young people how that would look for them? If we just take the time and ask these young people, what can I do for you that would allow you to feel like I value you? What can I do for you that would allow you to feel that your work is being valued here? And if you take the time, and some of those conversations are going to be uncomfortable, and you have to be willing, as a provider or as a mentor, you have to be willing to have those dialogues and be willing to say, you know what, if your young person comes to you and says you did A, B, and C, and that did not make me feel valued, you have to be willing to, to be an adult and say, you know what, I apologize, I didn't do that properly, and, go from there. And I want to hit again on the compensation, because a lot of agencies get away with not paying their young people. And that's partially because young people, when they first get into this work, they're not taught, hey, you're supposed to ask for money. Because I can promise you, if you don't ask for money, more often than not, people will not just freely take their wallet out and give you money. And when we're talking about how do we affirm our youth, I really believe we got to start with teaching our young people to come from a place of confidence and power. Because at the end of the day, when we're in these conversations, and I've learned this for myself, even if I am the only young person, and even if I at 23 am 20 years younger than everyone else at the table that I'm at, I know that my voice has value, because my story is something that people cannot fabricate. It's not something you can learn from a book. And that's where our young people have their power. And that's what my main mission in life is to teach young people just like myself how to use their story from a position of power. Because for a long time in my story, I was the victim. And now that I've grown up and I've developed my career, now I can speak from power about my story. It no longer has control over me. I have control over it. And that's what we really have to do a better job of, is teaching that to our young people and providing them platforms to experiment with that confidence.
Mitchell, Kylene, Eboni, Levi, thank you for bringing such confidence and power to the discussion today. It is definitely needed. And as people have listened, and I'm sure they've taken notes and bringing this to their program to pay young people, make sure that their identity is placed in the forefront as they see fit, making sure that they are heard and affirmed. They've been asking questions. And so I'm going to ask a question, and we can keep the same order. The first question is, what's the best way to manage expectations about how fast or slow a project can be implemented without losing trust?
So I'm going to answer this question, or I'm going to take a crack at it. The best way to manage expectations about how fast or slow a project can be implemented without losing trust. And here in Sacramento, I'm based in Sacramento, there was a project from the mayor regarding emergency bridge housing. And the mayor originally had said that it was for youth experiencing homelessness primarily, and that was the prioritization. And we had meetings about the prioritization and all that stuff. And then when COVID first hit, they changed it from the prioritization of being youth experiencing homelessness to being older, more at-risk people that could possibly, the comorbidity factor of COVID-19. So it was a very long time period from when we had these meetings about how to prioritize it for the youth to the mayor saying F that, and then saying it's for the elders. So then we wrote a letter to the mayor saying, hey, this is not okay. The youth experiencing homelessness needs somewhere to go during this time as well. And throughout the entire thing, we're expecting there to be this new housing for youth experiencing homelessness. Then we ended up losing trust in the mayor and the Sacramento government for being able to hold up to their promises. But then we wrote a letter, they changed it back, and then now we do have this, we have this shelter program for youth. The expectations of it were that they weren't going to do what we wanted. They said they were going to do what we wanted. They didn't do what we wanted. Then they ended up doing what we wanted. So we ended up losing a lot of trust. So I don't know about, there's no such thing as like maintaining trust. I feel like trust is such a, in my personal experience, it's such a conditional thing. Like I don't trust anybody straight off the gate. There's certain things you have to do to get that trust, but it's just, yeah. There's no way to make sure you're not losing trust, especially if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And that's how I'll answer that question.
So I don't know if it's more of an issue of losing trust, more so as continuous participation. Working with the departments and on the legislative side, I really had to learn that things take time. There's a lot of hierarchy approvals that I was not aware of. So I know in an earlier session, someone had mentioned having this ultimate goal that you want to achieve and working your way backward. So if you set those small goals, and when you keep accomplishing those and moving forward with these different programs or whatever your innovation happens to be, people get excited. So with each win, you're going to want to continue with it. And typically, like if anyone's created a business plan, things change all the time. So it actually kind of helps to have those small goals, because even though you keep that ultimate goal, your strategies are going to have to change. So, and earlier I had mentioned people will invest their time in things that their hearts are invested in. So I think if you just keep having that shared mission and really strengthening that relationship, you won't lose those youth.
You're on mute, Ebony.
My, oh my gosh. Okay. Thank you. One thing that was mentioned earlier, it immediately made me think of agile project management, essentially breaking down your goals. So I think one thing I would say, the first thing I think of is on a macro scale, right? Like the county, the state, and then I also think of like smaller programs. So if we're talking like the county and the state, as was mentioned earlier, there are like a lot of like bureaucratic levels and approvals and all of that, and that can get really murky and difficult. I'm also in Sacramento, so thank you for writing that letter. That was something that definitely impacted the community that I'm a part of. Many youth who are also like in the LGBT community, we ended up having to find ways to house our peers, and then during a pandemic, in which, you know, the LGBT community is highly impacted by being housing displaced due to various like forms of, you know, discrimination, especially like, and also like the economy just in general. So for us especially, that was something that was really frustrating to see. And the communication wasn't necessarily the smoothest either. So I think that is what also like really impacted our ability to trust the mayor and the council at large, especially because Sacramento PD has a practice of doing housing sweeps on the street. And so that also like was a worry that people had. In terms of, which I could speak more on, which is like the, you know, nonprofits, one way that we could establish trust and also create healthy expectations of how slow or fast something can occur is letting youth know immediately like what your communication style is, how often you plan on. I'm a freelancer, I'm a knitwear designer, I like made it this beanie, and if I have a commission, one thing as a creative that I do is I let the person I'm making something for, hey, I'm gonna message you once a week, couple times a week, this is how I'm going to message you, or asking them, how do you expect for, you know, this conversation to go? How would you like to be contacted? Because that way the youth aren't necessarily scrambling around, feeling like they're not really being addressed, or being addressed in a way that they might not actually use. Like I know a lot of youth like have emails, but they don't necessarily use their emails. And so they might prefer text message, or if you have a social media page like on Twitter or Facebook or, you know, IG, they might prefer to get their information that way. So those are just like two ways. Another way is to, as we were talking about earlier, one way to affirm the youth, right, is to include them in the project and also include them in the process of that project, right? So in the beginning, as you're saying, hey, we're going to implement this project, I'm going through what we call SWOT analysis, which is like your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, right? Letting the youth know exactly what's going on, how you plan to implement it, what obstacles you might have, communicating with them consistently, so that, you know, they are well aware of what's happening. Because I think oftentimes that's how the trust is lost, is not necessarily because the project didn't go exactly as planned, because we're all human and like life happens. What often happens is that there's a gap in communication. And so, you know, the youth then feel like they were not included, and it can make people feel more helpless when something just falls apart.
So I just want to, I know we're very short on time, so I just want to take a moment as we close out here and say, I want to thank all, I want to thank all of the panelists for your time and your intellect. I know that it's trying in these times that we're in, with the midst of all of the external chaos we're experiencing, that you guys took the time today to make this a priority, and I appreciate you for that. Just to close out on this topic as we end, in order to be realistic with these timelines and these expectations, it is our responsibility as people who have a more firm understanding than our young people of these systems to make sure that we lay out that as such. So I'm very well versed in the legislative system as well. And it's my responsibility to tell my young people, look, we're going to have to take this through several committees. And if we got to go through appropriations, this thing's dead in the water right now. I'm going to be honest with you. And that's our responsibility as people who understand as system leaders to make sure we lay that out in a real tangible way. But apart from that, I just want to thank all of our participants. I want to thank everyone who watched with us today. And I want to say that if any of you have any other questions or any other concerns, I know we didn't get to all the questions today, please reach out to this wonderful Breaking Barriers team. I'm sure they'll connect us. And I want to thank you all for your time and hope you all have a lovely rest of your session.